Hello everyone, I'm going to be doing a KV-5 weak spot guide here. It's going to correspond with a weak spot guide on my website, wattguru.com. You can find it in the video description below, and also at the end of the video. It goes into a little bit more in depth into each area. Starting out here though, is popping up this kind of overlay. You see the KV-5, everyone knows, it has a lot of little cupolas, little turrets, whatever you want to call them on it. Like I call them just cupolas, but basically there's the infamous Menz turret here, which is what most people aim at. You have one with driver, one with a loader, and one with the commander. And then there's two other guys shoved in there somehow. But looking at the front here, more or less gets us start at the front hull, because it's pretty complex, the KV-5's armor. And there's a lot of little bits to aim at and also to bounce off of, because there's a lot of different angles associated with it. With the front hull though, you have a somewhat weak lower glacis. It's 210 millimeters effective. It's fairly weak, but with the KV-5 only seeing up to tier 9, a lot of tier 8 tanks and under are going to struggle against that, and it's not, not exactly the most viable spot to shoot, but, tier 9s can go through it pretty well. But once you start getting up to this little added plate section, I called it a beak, and the upper glacis, 239 millimeters, and then it goes to 349, 398. So you don't really want to aim there. But it's moving up to the Radium Menz turret here, which is what most people aim at. It sits between 145 millimeters and 150 millimeters effective, dead center. Then once you kind of get out to the edges, it goes up to 171. And then you pop over to the very far edge and it's 244. So you're going to want to make sure you aim, right towards the center. And, for lower tier tanks specifically, the 171, once you start getting off to the edges, starts getting a little bit iffy, especially if you're in a tier 6 tank, a tier 7 that isn't like a TD or has a high penetrating gun. It could be a little difficult to penetrate it, especially with a KV-5 moving. That's the main strength to a KV-5's armor if you're a driver, is keep moving, wiggle a little bit, because you're going to get people to miss or hold their shots. That way, their reload time increases and, you lower their DPM. But moving over to the driver's cupola here, you can see it's much stronger. There's only a small little thin strip, and even, this top section's heavily angled. But only the small strip is 187 millimeters effective, so even stronger than the Radium Menz angled sides. And then once you start getting out to the side, 225, 338, it gets a lot stronger and difficult to hit and penetrate. So, aiming here, it can definitely help you if this is the only spot that's kind of pointing out from the KV-5. If it's hiding its Radium Menz turret behind, say, I don't know, a corner or something. You can penetrate here, but at the same time, that's 187 millimeters effective. If you just pop up to the turret front, it's a much larger area to hit here, just a flat bit. That's 186. So, it's only 1 millimeter less. But at the same time, it could be a little bit easier to hit, the flat section on the turret front. The cheeks are pretty strong here. They're 292, looking dead center on the KV-5. And, the turret is very large. And honestly, it could be a little bit stronger. It's not exactly on par with the upper and lower glacis, per se. Because, you would expect something with a turret this large and heavy armor to be a little bit better protective, but when you start looking at, the mantlet center here, this little box that's orange and yellow has no armor behind it. So, that starts at 180 millimeters and goes up to 212. And then this little bulge on the side of the gun isn't the mantlet, it's actually turret armor. It's not space armor at all. There's that strip that runs down that starts at 188 towards the center and goes to 211. And then once you start getting too high or too much to the sides, it starts adding more angles and you shouldn't shoot there. So finally, getting to the final two cupolas here, there's a lot about this tank. You have the commander's cupola, which is on the left here. It's pretty strong. It's a little bit deceiving looking just at the number, 151 millimeters at its weakest. That's just a very small strip that's right on, it basically connects to the roof. Like that's, that's basically the weakest area, but it's very small and hard to hit. Once you get above that in the center, it's heavily angled before it kind of tapers off to 193 millimeters effective at the top. But one thing you got to account for is the height of your tank. Oftentimes you're shooting up at it, so it's actually going to be stronger, and more likely it's going to be over, like 210 millimeters effective, especially if you're closer up. But it's still a spot worth noting. And even the edges here, how they're listed at 183, that's just that small little strip of armor. Because as you get up, it's a lot stronger, and you're not going to want to shoot there, even if you're in like a tier 9 with good penetration. You're better off going over to the loader's cupola, since that's much like the radio man's. It sits at 150, 166 millimeters in the center area, and then the sides 202, 355 as you get towards the edge. So that one's the larger target and much easier to hit, because while it looks like it might be angled, pretty much the way it's rendered, it's just just a cylinder essentially with no angles on it at all. Alright, so let's move to the side here, if I can get this set up pretty quickly. Ooh, that's actually pretty damn good. I might just leave it like that. Not perfect, but good enough. Alright, so the side, I didn't go into too much depth here because it's pretty straightforward. The side hull is 150 millimeters thick, not angled at all. Tracks add 20 millimeters, so it actually brings it up. Oops, if I can click back into the client, the tracks bring it above into the yellow zone at 170. So tier 6s, tier 7s can struggle against this, and it's just better to shoot at the areas with no track armor on them. The little cupolas that you have, pretty much hit them in the center, and that's the weakest areas. They're still weak spots. And the side turret is actually, it's fairly strong for against lower tiers, but against tier 8s and, high penetrating tier 7s, it's going to be pretty easy to pen, and even tier 9s. You just want to avoid this angled side turret, and also basically the back section's angled too, because it's pretty much all the same thickness. And also, you can shoot the side of the mantlet, but try to avoid, the angled sections. Now, one thing I do want to show here is basically, while the side armor was pretty weak here, once you start to angle the KV-5, it starts to get harder to hit areas without, track armor here. And, you're going to increase the effective armor on the side. You're going to have your very strong front, which pretty much whatever you angle that at, people don't want to shoot at it anyway. Your main weak spots people are going to be focusing on are your cupolas. And then once you angle, they can actually hit. You can't shoot too high here. This isn't part of the hitbox, but lower down is, in line with the rest of the engine deck. They're going to be shooting mainly here, your turret and your cupolas. So as a KV-5, if you're kind of, you don't want to angle too much. But if you're just kind of driving in an enemy and kind of wiggling back and forth in a way, that's pretty much the most effective thing that you can do in this tank. Because your side armor isn't the strongest. It's pretty strong, but you do need to add angle to it because it's not angled at all. So finally, getting to the rear of the tank, if I can line that up a little bit better here. Good enough. Looking at the rear, it's still pretty weak, but you definitely can't, just kind of phone it in and shoot whatever you want at the back. Most of the rear hull armor, 193 to 153 millimeters of effective armor, that accounts for the slope and everything. You do have this one big strip here that for whatever reason they threw a 230 millimeter plate on the back of it. So that's pretty damn strong. Even tier 9s are going to struggle against it. You do not want to hit this area because you will bounce off of it. And pretty much the way that you discern what it is basically the angled section on the top part of the rear hull. And also towards the bottom of the hull you have pretty heavily armored angle or armor. And that's pretty strong too, 178 plus millimeters effective. The rear turret, pretty much like the side, it's 180 millimeters thick, not angled. So shooting it, if you know your penetration, you'll be able to pen it or not pen it. And pretty much it's mostly all flat back there outside of, you know, a couple little angled areas in the sides. Same thing with the loader's cupola. It's virtually the same front, side, and rear, give or take a couple degrees. You know, that's going to be pretty easy to penetrate if you hit it in the center, but you're kind of better off just hitting the rear turret or the rear hull, as long as you can aim, you know, pretty effectively and miss the angled spots, which aren't very hard, or this strip. So, you know, the rear, while it's weak, you definitely get some, like, WTF shots where you're like, why did I just bounce off of that? You know, when you're like shooting, you know, out of a tier 8, 9 tank on the rear and you hit this section and you just want to kind of scream. But anyway, hopefully this guide helped you out a little bit with the KV-5's armor. Feel free to check out the guide for it on my website, wakuger.com. It's going to be popping up any second now if it hasn't already, and it's also in the video description below. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully you had a good time. I'll see you around. Have a good day.